right, welcome everyone to another session at the new Media Center here at INACSL 2022. My name's Lance. I'm the founder CEO of HealthySimulation.com. So excited to be sitting down for exclusive interviews and content. For those of you who might not have been able to make it to Milwaukee here this year, we wanted to be able to share some of the love of the knowledge and experience and resources that we're gathering, some of the information we're learning from our peers, either through these expert presentations or by networking opportunities. And so I'm really excited to be learning for the first time here as well about a new resource, a new podcast with INACSL called Let's Talk Sim. And it's being run here by my guest, which is Jennifer Alderman, who's the associate professor at UNC Chapel Hill. So thank you so much for joining us here today, and tell me a little bit more about what we're doing with this new podcast.
Sure. Thank you, Lance, for having me today. So Let's Talk Sim actually was born in our membership engagement committee.
Okay.
So we began talking about that in our small committee maybe a year and a half to 2 years ago.
So this was mid-pandemic,
yes,
or beginning
yes,
pandemic.
Yes,
okay,
but we
great.
had an idea that we wanted to interview simulation experts in different topic areas.
Yes.
And we actually originally called it Interview with an Innovator. That was the first kind of, buzzword kind of title. But what it evolved into is Let's Talk Sim. But we really wanted to get expertise out there, particularly in the pandemic, when folks were looking for resources to do, virtual simulations, since we were all doing virtual versus face-to-face. So,
Right.
So that's how the conversation started. We
Yeah.
wanted to kind of corral this expertise as a resource. But INACSL at the time did not have the infrastructure to really put it out like they wanted to. We had talked about webinar versus podcast. And then some changes were made with infrastructure, and they were able to finally launch the podcast this spring.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's available, I think, on a lot of different platforms. Tell me
Yes.
about that real quick.
It is available on Spotify.
Wow, that's easy.
And if you go to the INACSL website and under the education tab,
Okay.
it's there, and it gives you some links and things to it through that as well.
Okay, great. So Spotify and a couple of others, if I'm
Yes,
not mistaken.
Anchor, I believe, is another one.
Okay,
Yes,
great. So
yes.
wherever you're getting your podcast, it's a good chance that Let's Talk Sim is going to be there. And tell me about some of the episodes that you guys have had so far, some of the interviews
Sure,
that you've been able to,
So
to provide.
Absolutely. So we started off with Dr. Margaret Verkyle from Canada, and she is doing a lot of work in virtual sim. She's an expert in that, well published on it. I actually heard her speak last year at INACSL's virtual conference, which is why she was on my radar.
Okay.
So she kicked off our series.
Yeah.
And she was our episode 1 guest. So she talked about virtual sim and some of the work she's doing in Canada.
Awesome.
Episode 2 was around virtual reality, and we had a couple of experts.
Yes.
Tracy Chesney and Marion Fluchtart. It's a hyphenated last name, but
Sure.
anyway. So they were our experts on episode 2
Okay.
and about virtual reality simulation.
Yeah.
So episode 3 is going to be recorded this coming week, and our guest is going to be Cynthia Ferranda, who is a longtime leader in INACSL, and she is a faculty at University of Miami, and she's going to talk about her DEI, diversity and inclusion, equity and inclusion work,
Okay.
incorporating cultural humility into simulation. She has a cultural humility toolkit, sim toolkit, as a resource when you're developing simulation, to be sure to include that.
Sure. So it sounds like the podcast is going to be not just focused on one particular aspect, but
Right.
just really kind of covering anything that might be relevant to
Yes.
those engaging with nursing simulation or the
Correct.
wider contextual healthcare simulation as a
Correct.
whole.
Yes.
And what are your goals for the podcast? What would you like to
Sure.
see it used for, and the kind of content that you'd like to capture
Absolutely.
with it?
So we really would like it to be something to draw people to become members of INACSL.
Sure.
So as far as our membership engagement
Because it's
work,
not members only, right? Anyone can listen
right,
to the podcast.
that is true.
Great,
Yes.
great.
We would like to entice them into joining
Sure.
by
Demonstration
sparking
of
an
what's
interest.
happening here.
Exactly. Current kind of hot topics, and to show that INACSL is cutting edge.
Yeah.
INACSL is well informed of what the current issues are in nursing education, particularly.
Sure. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Well, we love that. And I know for those of that are more audio, want to listen, or you're driving,
Yes.
the podcast makes a lot of sense. But I do know there's also the new Center for Learning online. So new infrastructure on the INACSL.org website that I think was just launched, that provides for also webinar-based opportunities with CEs as well. So if you're interested in more desktop-based sit-down content. And then I do know that, for example, so many of the sessions here for the keynotes are also being recorded via video as well. So, I think this is part of what we learned from the president and vice president, Susie, and from Laura in our previous interview, that, hey, COVID has really kind of forced us to kind of rethink our infrastructure, right, on how we're going to be dealing with remote and distance-based conversations or demonstrations. And so this is, I think, a part of a wider INACSL push for more digital content to help overcome, COVID, but also moving forward, this is just going to be part of what we do from here on out.
Right. That's exactly right.
And I think that that's a metaphor, right? Not only for the organization, but for us as simulationists in this space as a whole, right? From the audience here, raise your hand. Have you been using Zoom and digital-based learning technologies that previously you hadn't been using to overcome the challenges of COVID? I'm seeing a lot of head nods and hands raising. Yeah, and so, we were able to put together a survey launched earlier this year on the impacts of COVID, and we saw that a lot of groups really found a lot of empowerment with the use of these technologies. Naysayers had no other alternative, and so we've overcome those challenges with these technologies, and there'll be actually more use of them over time. So that's really exciting to hear. So with regards to the podcast specifically, though, what would you hope that will be part of the content that you guys would like to roll out and have more interviews on or more subjects? I want to make sure people watching this video, if they think that they might align with the podcast, they know to reach out. How can they do that, and what kind of topics are you looking for now?
Sure. So again, we're looking at what's current, what's hot in nursing education. Speaking as a nurse educator, definitely looking at more DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion work for simulation, interprofessional education. We're certainly going to have that as one of the focuses of podcasts in the fall. And I'm thinking in some conversations I've had already at the conference, I'm looking at transition to practice simulation for particularly pre-licensure nursing students, bringing in folks who have expertise in that and are doing a lot of great work around improving clinical reasoning of pre-licensure nursing students.
Okay, great.
So those are some things that we're kicking around now that we'd like to have for the fall.
So if you're working on anything in those kind of subdomains, absolutely reach out. Or if you think that you've got some useful information that others might be able to learn or benefit from. Similarly to the podcast, we at healthysimulation.com on the Learn platform, we've recorded almost 180 webinars, many of which are providing for CEs and now CMEs on our Learn platform. So, I think this is part of this widening of the ecosystem that's taken place over the 2 years to try to address the need. This is the first meeting we've been able to come together in 2 years at INACSL. So certainly a demonstration here of the opportunity to leverage those tools and go beyond the face-to-face meeting, which is great, but we can only do this once a year, and internationally, not everyone can attend and participate. Well, great. So really excited to start to listen more. We've got a podcast page that covers all the podcasts that we know about in healthcare simulation on Healthy Sim. If you just search for podcasts on healthysimulation.com, we'll make sure to get this added at the top there, and we'll be able to share more about that and the other great podcasts that are out there in the space. So thank you so much for your time today, Jennifer. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lance, so much for having me today.
Cheers. All right. We'll see you all in the next one.